I work in the areas of modern Catholic theology and systematic theology, and I've been asked to say a little bit about a book I recently published called God, Evil, and the Limits of Theology. Over the years, like many academics, I've quite often been asked to speak about things which were not my main project at the time. And I've seen these papers and articles as a kind of guilty distraction, slowing down whatever I was supposed to do, distracting me from my main core research. What I eventually realized, though, is that whatever particular topic I was asked to talk about, and did talk about, I nevertheless came back to a certain set of preoccupations. I was circling around the same issue, questions about the nature of mystery and paradox in theology, questions of the limits of what can be thought. And so this book, God, Evil, and the Limits of Theology, has emerged out of what I originally thought of as these many distractions to my real work. And now that it's published and I'm beginning to get a bit of a response to it, I've started to think that perhaps I should think of it not as the book of distractions, but as the central piece of work I've been doing all along. I want to say a little bit about one essay in the volume, which has a particularly strong link to my ongoing research. This essay is called Julian of Norwich, Hans Urs von Balthasar, and the Status of Suffering in Christian Theology. Julian of Norwich was an anchorite, a mystic and theologian in the 14th and 15th century, so roughly contemporaneous with Chaucer. And as far as we know, she's the first woman to have written in English. Hans Urs von Balthasar was a 20th century Swiss-German Catholic theologian, very voluminous writer, very literary in an inclination. So they're an unusual pair to bring together. And in one sense, the only reason that I've done it is that I happened to be teaching on Julian year after year at the same time as I was writing a book on Hans Urs von Balthasar. And I began to notice that each of them was deeply preoccupied by suffering. And at the same time, there was quite a sharp and striking contrast between the basic patterns of their thought. So in this essay, I propose that we can find in them two templates, two fundamentally different ways within a Christian context of relating love and suffering. On the one hand, in Balthasar's thought, there's always a merging of love and suffering, so that mention of suffering always carries overtones of sort of positive spiritual overtones, and love is almost never mentioned without suffering or sacrifice or loss of self being somewhere nearby. And in Julian, by contrast, even though she has such a fascination with suffering that it can be quite troubling to modern readers, she ultimately holds love and suffering apart. And that's allied to a fundamentally more positive sensibility that runs through her work. An interesting thing is this means in the case of Julian that there's a refusal of intellectual resolution at the core of her theology. There's a limit to how far explanation can go for her. While Balthasar does offer his readers a unifying, integrating vision in which he can give account of how all things, including suffering and evil, fit together. This essay was my first stab at thinking about the status of suffering in Christian thought. It's an area that I continue to work on, and one that I constantly sense is on the edge of being just impossibly large and impossibly amorphous, but at the same time where I keep catching a glimpse of something quite important, which I think can and should be said.